Good morning, good afternoon, and thank you for attending the webinar from Rapidi Online on how to integrate Microsoft Dynamics NAV with Salesforce.com. My name is John McCabe, and I look after sales and operations for Rapidi Online in the U.S. And what we want to do is just do quick introductions. For the team on our side, I'd like to introduce Keith Merrick. Good morning or good afternoon, Keith.
Good morning, John. This is Keith Merrick. Welcome, everybody. I'm also an officer in sales and operation here at Rapidi, and today I'll be demonstrating the solution, or the end-to-end solution for you. Quite exciting. Over to you, John.
That's perfect. Thanks very much, Keith. And I'm also joined by Thomas. Thomas looks after our technical support and project implementations. Good morning, Thomas.
Good morning, John. Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm in charge of the implementation and support section here at Rapidi Online, and I'm going to be handling the Q&A today. So any questions you might have during the session, there is a question section, and post your questions, and we're going to handle them during the course or after. Thank you very much.
That's perfect. Thanks, Thomas. And Beate Thompson. Beate, good morning to you.
Good morning, John, and good morning everyone on the call here. Yes, I'm responsible for the marketing at Rapidi Online, and I will be handling some polls today.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you very much. So, and thanks again, everybody. It looks like we've got a great audience this morning. What we wanted to do, just before we kick off, I wanted to walk through a couple of housekeeping items. For today's session, we're recording it, so you'll, as follow-up, Beate will send out the audio and the slides that we'll review today and the entire presentation. So certainly feel free. For any of your colleagues that didn't get a chance to attend this morning, forward that through to them as well. As Thomas mentioned as well, we'd like to keep it interactive, albeit it's a big group. So if there are questions, I've got a question and answer session at the end. Certainly type in your questions as we go through and as we get through the agenda. And as far as the agenda goes, what we want to achieve today in the next 45 minutes or so is to leave you with a complete picture of who Rapidi Online are and the solutions that we deliver to the market for integrating, in this case, we'll focus on today, Salesforce.com to Microsoft Dynamics. And so I'll turn it over to Beate, and we can do our first poll, just get some additional background on your role in the organization as an attendee.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, just a quick, like John mentioned, how would you describe yourself if you would be in sales or marketing, or rather more technical? Thank you very much for that.
Perfect. Okay, thank you, Beate. So just to get started, let me just provide a little bit of background on Rapidi Online. It's actually a unique story for what we're going to talk about today. Our company goes back 20 years, and the founders of Rapidi Online were actually involved in the design and development of a product called Navision, which was the precursor to what's now is acquired by Microsoft, Microsoft Dynamics NAV. So for that ecosystem, we've been there since the very beginning, like I said, over 20 years. And our mission has always been, I use the phrase, stick to our knitting. We do data integration and data replication, and that's what we'll talk about today. And over those years, have built the organization across the globe with installations and implementations on each continent. And have done that through through this team here that you're meeting, as well as a network of partners, implementation partners that focus on integrating Salesforce.com and or Microsoft Dynamics. So with the very deep 20-year experience in the Microsoft ecosystem, if you will, over the last 10 years, we've coupled that experience with a deep focus on Salesforce. And as when I turn over to Keith for the demonstration portion of that, that's what we'll focus on today. And I think what will come out is pure experience. And I think given the history and the uniqueness, one of the things that we'll talk about is support and for all versions. I think we're quite unique in terms of the versions in the Microsoft ecosystem that we support across Dynamics NAV, going back to previous releases up to the latest release of the application. And Thomas will talk a little bit about that too on the Salesforce side and how we support that. So what do we deliver to the market? And it's really a complete business solution. As a foundation, we deliver a generic integration platform and solution. But on top of that, and I'll go into a bit more detail a little bit further on in the presentation, on top of that we provide a complete business solution in the way of templates and best practices to really take advantage of our experience and quickly implement the integrations that you're trying to achieve. We tend to measure these implementations, what I call in terms of hours, quick, rapid implementations, and the methodology that we use. Again, we measure these in hours. My background is from the ERP space, where implementations tend to be measured in months and years or light years. This is done very quickly, as we'll see when we go through the actual application, through the demonstration piece. Today's focus is obviously for the details that we'll look at on the solution, and the end-to-end business solution will be salesforce.com to Microsoft Dynamics NAV. But just to paint the picture, as you look at your organization and you complete that integration project, if there are other parts of the organization that may not fit into that, those buckets, we've also had successful implementations around Oracle, Microsoft SQL Server, anything in the ODBC environment as well. So it's just to get you thinking a little bit. Today's focus is here in the Microsoft Dynamics NAV, but as your organization, you think across that, where are other points of integration where we may be able to add some value to your business. In terms of scalability, just looking at, again, growth of 20 years in customers and installations across the globe, we have customers in these small, medium-sized business and manufacturing, straight up through B2C, B2B customers with data volumes in the millions of transactions per month. So the scalability of the application, as I start to go through a little bit of the architecture and how we achieve that, there's really no ceiling, so to speak, of the amounts of data and transactions that we can bring through and achieve the integration. So how do we achieve that integration? This is really a snapshot of the technology and how we connect in this environment from Microsoft Dynamics NAV through to Salesforce. What I'll do is start on the right side of the screen, and we install the Rapidi connector. So small Windows service application, or think of it as the handshake that looks for an outbound connection through the firewall, and what that'll connect to is the Rapidi Online Central Service, and that's where the integration and all the mapping and connections really take place. Keith is going to, when I turn over to him, we'll spend some time looking at that, the user interface, ease of use. Once we're in the Rapidi Online Central Service, that's a cloud environment, and we'll connect to cloud through to Salesforce there. A couple of key things about the architecture is to keep in mind it's an end-to-end solution. So there's no temporary data storage. It's being passed from Microsoft Dynamics NAV through to Salesforce in both directions, depending on what type of integration that you need. So it covers the end-to-end solution, and the two real key pillars in this picture are security and reliability. Again, we're not doing any any type of temporary storage or data storage within the Rapidi online central service solution. So earlier in the presentation we talked about the foundation and the generic integration solution that we've been bringing to market for 20 years, and on top of that we provide this complete business solution. So from a best practices and experience standpoint, we deliver these templates, and in this environment, these are some of the standard template integrations that we see customers looking to achieve as they start to integrate Salesforce to Microsoft Dynamics NAV. Now, as part of the overall integration, the Rapidi online solution will do a full data across both sides, or both connection points, on the NAV side and on the Salesforce side. So it's going to pick up through these templates all these standard fields. However, it will also pick up any customized fields that have been developed in NAV, customized tables, customized fields and functions within Salesforce. So it's looking at the broad picture. And as I pull this template out, or this business solution out, we've set this up as this is what we see as a best practice, where we're integrating customers to accounts. In this example, we're going bi-directional. So for the arrows at the center of the slide, those can go either way. It's going to depend on your business requirements. So in the simple example of customers to accounts, we are integrating those two and actually managing if there are any customized fields underneath that as well, and managing what we call scatter and gather. If the field types are slightly different, if in one endpoint it's 3 fields that make up the address, or it's 1 field, we can take that data and scatter and or gather that so it maps and integrates perfectly. So moving down, how are we managing items to products? And as part of this business solution, we can define which side or which endpoint, whether it be Microsoft or Salesforce, is the system of record. So in many instances, products are being defined in Salesforce, and they're being sent back to or integrated with Microsoft Dynamics items. In that case, Salesforce would be the system of record there. As it relates to accounting items, typically Microsoft Dynamics NAV is going to be the system of record for that part of the business. As we look at deeper and deeper into the integration, from a Salesforce perspective, we can manage sales history based on booked invoices. So this starts to give the instance or the users of Salesforce that are out in the field, they're just about to go to a customer appointment, they really have a 360-degree view of what's happening in that account. I can see that sales history, I can see what's booked, payment history, anything, how the account was settled, etc. And more important, I think, from the sales force and the sales field sales organization, they have pure visibility on sales orders. What is the status of that order? And then finally, dear to the sales rep's heart is opportunities. How are we managing, if I'm entering opportunities in Salesforce, how is that translating back into Microsoft Dynamics? And one of the unique things about the technology that we deliver is the incremental updates. So if you're taking advantage in Salesforce of any other workflow and you want to update NAV for when an opportunity becomes to the next stage, whatever you've defined in your business process, that may go from opportunity to order, we can trigger and we will do the updates and integration. But just taking the incremental or the changes that have happened to that opportunity since the last update. So just as a recap, again, from the foundation, delivering what we'll call a generic integration platform for security and reliability, and layering on top of that to expedite and ensure the implementations are done quickly and efficiently, we overlay this end-to-end business solution, taking into account the core Salesforce and/or Microsoft NAV fields, as well as any of the customized fields that you may have implemented on either side or either endpoint in either system. So we'll move to the next poll. We just talked a lot about some of the challenges and how we can alleviate that with some of the business templates and best practices. What's your biggest challenge regarding the data integration? Okay. Okay. So what we wanted to do now is, what we've tried to do is position and give you some background on the solution, a bit of the history, a bit of the success, where we can add value to the organization, and then drill down a little bit on the architecture of the application, and then some of the business solutions that we deliver in the realm of templates. What I'd like to do now is just turn it over to Keith Merrick and ask him to actually walk through a demonstration of integrating the two endpoints that we've been talking about today. Keith, can I turn it over to you?
Thank you, John. We have prepared quite an exciting demo for you today that will actually take us through the architecture that John has just shared with us, really going through the entire spectrum, what we call the end-to-end integration. So we'll be seeing a part of the ERP side, the Dynamics NAV, which is a NAV 2013 for you today. We'll also look at the data side on the Salesforce side. So we have a Salesforce org here integrated with this entity here. And lastly, we'll also have the opportunity to look a little bit closer view to Rapidi Online Central Service. That is, as John mentioned, is where you basically configure, set up, and monitor the entire solution. So you'll have all pieces covered today with that full overview for you. So starting from the NAV side, well, with more than 25 years experience, we have really done a lot of integration and replication solutions around, particularly around Dynamics NAV. And for that, we use different, well, first of all, we support all versions of Dynamics NAV, all the way back to the early 90s, and of course to the latest version today. We also utilize a whole range or palette of connection types. And those connection types are really, or the ones we use will be based on which version of NAV are we to integrate to, but also what type of task are we to perform in the integration solution. So we have two dimensions there we need to evaluate. So obviously for the earlier versions up to the 2009 R1, there we utilize what is different granules on the Navision side, like the C-front, the NAS or Navision Application Server. From 2009 R2 and onwards, then we have well, further developed or enhanced the SQL connector, which does as powerful features as the C-front, basically. So we have enhanced that SQL connector, and we utilize that for typically mass updates. So when you have 200, 500,000 records and you need to update in both sides, we go with the SQL connector, and that's quite powerful there. On the when adding data into your NAV instance, we utilize web services, which is quite ideal for this type of tasks because utilizing the web services, first of all, will trigger the entire business logic that lays within NAV. So basically, it's the same as creating new records using the native client within NAV. So that's obviously a very good way of integrating those type of integrations. Also worth to mention that we also have, as John mentioned, we always have focus on performance on one side and security on another. So that's quite a within this NAV instance here. If we look at this is a Kronos database. If we look at our Selangorian account here, then well, in standard NAV you'll be seeing all the different open orders for this particular client, all the other posted invoices, credit memos, the balance, the ledger entries, the works. Well, just to open up a few that we could recognize, at least to go back when we look at the Salesforce side. But just looking at different, well, here it's an open order that has these three elements, three items: the Zenmards and the Inbrook storage units. We could also look at the different, well, the booked invoices here. Same with all the details that you basically have within your standard NAV instance. And this one, and this invoice is Contoso storage system at 94460. We also have what we know as the calculated fields, of course, which makes up our balance, among others. We also have our ledger entries, which is basically a summary of all the transactions that have been done through onto this account here. That is basically the snapshot I wanted to share with you here on the NAV side. Because if we go a step further and look at our Salesforce, then we will find, well, same set of data that has been fully integrated with our NAV 2013 here. Beside all the master data, obviously, that has been mapped, and I'll show you, of course, the engine that has run for those or done that task. Then we would find, first thing here is the legal entity. This is just to show that this solution is per default supporting a multiple company, multiple currency type of setup. So in other words, you could have all your companies within your NAV or multiple NAV instances integrated into one and the very same Salesforce instance. And it gives a pretty good consolidated CRM or CEM systems even that really gathers all the information that these users really need to be more productive, to have the data exactly where and when they need it. Scrolling down further here, you'll see the financial information. This financial information is pretty much similar to the flow filters that you would know from the Dynamics NAV world. So basically, because we have the data or the data set, we utilize it to sum up actually similar functionality as the calculated fields of flow filters in NAV here in Salesforce. So this gives us really the same power building up these fundaments of financial information for the Salesforce users right at their fingertips in Salesforce. So open balance, year-to-date sale, all that stuff. Scrolling further down, where John has shared a business solution with us, these are just some of the elements that we saw earlier. we will look here at the same invoices we've seen earlier in NAV. So with the exact same deep level of information here. So basically all the fields mapped over and transferred over to the very same object here in the Salesforce platform. The transfer that we do, by the way, is what we call intelligent transfers or intelligent sub-transfers, which basically means that when we transfer a header, in this instance, the lines will follow as well. So in that case, you will avoid having a situation with a header without lines. So everything will be transferred at one shot. But otherwise, basically all the information will be mapped over, transferred from your NAV to Salesforce here, including, of course, all the level of details that you have within your booked sales invoice line in this case here. We also have the entire suite of ledger entries implemented here in this solution. And this would include, obviously, all that you've seen in NAV 2013, all the ledger entries that are included for this particular client. So you'll, of course, see the payments, the amounts, and also the remaining amounts. And that's actually what we utilize, obviously, to summarize or to roll up into an open balance, for instance. We could even have the same level of functionality you would have in your NAV solution. For instance, if you're settling against an invoice, a payment against it, you will see the same type of functionality here, because once you open up your ledger entry payment, then you'll see, well, this one has been settling or been crediting this particular invoice and so on. So this is really bringing the best of both worlds and bringing the power you have in your very complex environments within NAV, bringing it into a simple format for the field users or the sales folks. So that's a bit about the ledger entries. Finally, we also have an example here. As John mentioned, we have different methods really to do well, sales orders or opportunities or sales quotes for that matter. This one here is transferred sales orders as is from NAV to Salesforce. And this typically scenario used in a produce-to-order type of business, where you basically want to have the latest update of your sales orders right into your Salesforce for your people there to see exactly, for instance, if there is a new delivery date or back orders and the like. So again, with the whole range of information transferred over from NAV with all the level of details that you would know. And again, for this example that you've seen earlier, well, you have all the discount codes, the dimension codes, really all the elements that you basically have with your NAV instance. So with this in hand, and because the data is really residing now within Salesforce, then the 360-degree overview that John mentioned earlier, this really gives you the full overview here. So from the same account, you will have all your contacts, which, by the way, can also be part of the account integration, your sales history, your ledger entries, your orders, or even quotes, opportunities, because there is a variety of ways of handling opportunities, particularly opportunities in Salesforce. But because of all this, then the user or the Salesforce users can really have a direct access into all this wealth of information. That means they can report, they can dashboard as they are used to within Salesforce, which is very, very easy to do. And that means that they would not need to consume any services of alike services within the NAV world. So everything will be found right at their fingertips here in Salesforce. So that's the quick overview I wanted to share with you here today with looking at the Salesforce. As promised, I also want to share with you the Rapidi Online Central Service, the engine where everything is really set up and configured. Rapidi Online Central Service is a true cloud platform, so accessible anytime, anywhere. This demo we have here is well, accessible here for the NAV demo here, where you basically, when you start your service or you link up to your service, you get a quick overview of how things are running. So a dashboard that really gives you the quick overview of different services and how they're running. Typically when we start up new projects, then we start up by building up the connections. And the connections here are, well, for this particular NAV 2013 that we typically, as I mentioned earlier, we typically use the NAV SQL connector. We utilize the web service and of course the connection over to Salesforce. In all these instances, it's very, very basic. Wizard-based connecting servers and databases, always accessing them as a true client, which make it a lot easier, but also getting the best of both worlds. Once these connections are built up, maybe it's worth to mention here just for the security purposes that when we utilize or when we expose the web services within the NAV world, we expose it only onto your local network, so they will not be exposed to the outside world. And this is very important because our Rapidi connector that John has shared with us earlier in the architecture, that's the piece that's a web service that will link up with the Rapidi connector. But basically once these connections are built up, then we read the design of both solutions. So reading up the field names, field types, table names, the works. And I'll show you actually how, among others, how do we use these or this design for. Once the connections are built up, then we can go over and start building up our transfers. The transfers that you see here are all part of that very business solutions that John has shared with us earlier. So basically, if you are to go with the standard integration business solution, it's a matter of really deploying it as is. At maximum, it would be some adaptation to be done on the transfer level, and then you have the integration running really from day one. If we look a little bit closer to one of these transfers here, for instance, this one that really updates the customer from NAV to Salesforce. Looking at these properties for this particular transfer, then we see a whole range, well, of powerful features. They're all linked to either the NAV or the Dynamics NAV world or the Salesforce. John has already mentioned some scatter and gather type of functionality, which is quite really powerful, where you can really build up, well, if it's an address field in Navision is in 3 fields, it's only in 1 in Salesforce. Then you can scatter and gather information in that sense. We can, I think John also mentioned some incremental updates, which is really a powerful technology for us, which is set up here in Source Control to make sure that we only transfer the real changes that has occurred since the last time we have done the transfer. And this is quite powerful. Again, to me, it's quite high performance, moving the data that really has changed only. Again, you can sort the limits as you use or as you want to within your data sets. A classical one within the field mapping, well, here you can see some basic fields that are being mapped from the customer table in NAV into Salesforce. But adding a new field, for instance, is as easy as, well, editing it, finding a new field. And because we have read the design of both solutions, that we do not do what we call spaghetti mapping. So you would not be forced to look at hundreds and hundreds of fields in both source and destination. As soon as you start typing, actually this platform would recognize the field that matches the criteria you're searching for. So in this instance, city. And the same would go on your destination, which is Salesforce. As soon as you start typing again, it will match all the list of field that matches the criteria here. And that's as easy as that. You go up, you can activate the changes, and then run the transfer, or actually the transfer will run automatically. That's it. That's how easy it is to adapt the changes that John has mentioned earlier. That goes for fields, new data structures, new tables, and so forth. Beside the classical field mapping, the application is really enriched by, well, 25 years experience, I guess, of replicating and integrating to NAV. So among others, we have some quite powerful features like the VLOOKUP you see here, which is really a way of transferring or getting hold of information that resides in other tables than just the customer table, which is where we are now. So for in this instance, we're grabbing the country name rather than the country code, which is quite interesting to get hold of and transfer over to Salesforce. We also have a whole range of, for functionality or logical forms for data cleansing, for logical conditional statements. So you can really do some very, very complex, quite powerful integration. But again, in a very simple form, but also quite lean and simple and easy to maintain, which is the whole idea here, is that you can solve your complex integration platform in a very easy and user-friendly way. That's a bit about the field mapping here. I won't go to much more of the details here, but there's a whole range of powerful functionality here that really eases up your integration. Once the transfers are built up, or adapted rather, then we can start, well, we have a tags technology, which is really a way for the customer to have multiple companies within their NAV instance. It's a technology that will enable you really to reutilize the same transfers, just building up with some other variables. Actually, you could just see here with percentages here, there are variables which we can parse out of the tags solution here. Quite powerful. Again, winning a lot of time moving ahead with your integration solution. We can also group our transfers. The grouping is done for logical sequence. You probably want to transfer your master data customer-wise, invoice-wise, items, and so on. Once these groups are built up, we can start scheduling them. And the scheduling is a quite flexible, powerful engine here. Basically, you can set up to run as per your requirements. We'll come back to the interval. I think John will cover it later. But otherwise, you can set it up to run daily within this time slot. But what it really also does, it also handles a notification agent, which means that it can also handle error. So if this transfer hits an error, we can set it up as this, in this example, it will retry within 1 hour. We can go a step further and say, well, if it fails beyond 5 hours, then the notification engine will send out emails to all the admin folks. From that piece of email, you'll land straight into the service, look exactly what needs to be rectified, and have the service up and running again. The entire log statistics that we have within Rapidi Online Central Service are all native, in this case, NAV or Dynamics NAV or Salesforce. So all the error codes will be deriving from these two solutions. Very easy to find, very easy to rectify, and have the service up and running. So all in all, that's why we call it a type of set it and forget it type of platform, which really empowers and runs the integration fully in the back office. That is the quick demo here I had prepared for you today. Hopefully you've seen a little bit of all the components that make up the Rapidi Online powerful integration engine here. I think with that, I will hand it over back to John. John,
that's
here
perfect.
you go.
Thank you, Keith. Fantastic. That's good stuff. was trying to jump in there. It's exciting stuff. And what I think that does is what we've tried to do in the presentation today is kind of these building blocks, show some expertise, and then I went through the architecture and background, and then from the live demo, how do we get this in action, and how do we solve those integration problems for your organization? That was great. Thank you very much, Keith. And so the fourth building block is how do we engage from a pricing perspective? And Keith talked about, how often do we set up? How often do the integrations happen? What are the timing intervals, et cetera? So as part of our pricing strategy to the end customer, we have different tiers of the Rapidi online solution, and I just wanted to walk through quickly how that's, as you start to think about your organization, how you're structured, what your NAV instances look like, how many companies, those sorts of things. I can paint the picture of how that may be translated to the different solutions within Rapidi Online, whether it be the basic, the standard, up at the enterprise level, or unlimited. And the way that those different tiers are defined is really kind of four pillars, if you will. The first one is the application connections or endpoints that we are going to connect, and that's, in this instance, would be two. We count Salesforce.com and Microsoft Dynamics NAV. If you have additionals, endpoints that you'd like to connect outside of what we're talking about today, that certainly accommodated, but it starts to look at different tiers within our structure. The other thing that we look at is total number of companies. Keith talked about when he was doing the Salesforce portion of the demonstration. Our solutions are by nature and by design multi-company, multi-currency. So if you have multiple companies in your ERP instance or instances, that will also drive which tier, basic, standard, or enterprise, that would be required for your organization. And then there's just a couple of other quick things. Keith had talked about how often do we want to update these things. We have customers that are doing it on an hourly basis, through to, if you looked at the performance slide that we looked at earlier, where there's B2C or B2B customers that require up-to-the-minute updates on orders, quotes, product pricing items, all those key business elements. They would typically require what we call the 1 minute or up to the minute updates. Again, so that's the update frequency is something that really drives the matrix for how we deliver these solutions. And the final one is really perfect timing, as Keith just wrapped up looking at the Rapidi Online Central Service. Through our partners or through our company direct, we can, as part of the implementation, set up the integration, and as Keith used the term, set it and forget it. And you don't need access to the engine that we looked at. There are options to just, again, set it up once and then forget it. And if you need some additional assistance or some additional mapping, work with Thomas's group to come back. We can reconfigure it for you. However, if you do require access to the mapping engine, that is certainly available, and that, again, that really drives the tier for the matrix of what solution best fits for your organization. So again, it's total number of endpoints, total number of entities or companies within your ERP, your update frequency, and then whether or not you would require access to the mapping tool. Okay. Oops, sorry. So with that, I just want to do a quick recap. I sort of did that right before the pricing, but a couple of things that we want, hopefully you take away. I talk about 4 key elements. It's experience, what we bring to the table, security and reliability. As Keith demonstrated, really the ease of use, wizard-driven end-user-driven rapid implementations, and starting to get to think about, you know, the return on investment, the time and effort that you're spending on integrations today, and what the Rapidi online solutions could deliver to your organization to start to build out an ROI and how you can bring that forward. So with that, what I'd like to do is turn it over to Thomas, and we've been on for about 45 minutes, so we just wanted to see if there's what questions came up during that session, and have Thomas walk through and answer any of those to the best of his ability. And as Keith mentioned, if we can't answer it straight away, we'll certainly follow up with you and circle back with a response to that. Thomas?
Thank you very much, John. I do have a few to go through here. The first I'm actually going to hand over to Keith, and that's on, let me rephrase a bit here, but how do we handle an implementation project from A till Z, basically? How do we approach it, you know, when we get it, and how do we proceed going forward? Keith?
Sure, Thomas. Sure, Thomas. Thank you. The typical process of kickstarting or rolling out a new implementation is basically gathering, well, from the customer side, of course, the partner eventually, either Salesforce or Dynamics NAV partner, if that is such one involved, and ourselves, of course. And we kickstart always by go through a workshop, which is a session of a couple of hours, to nail down really all the requirements that are for the project. So once the workshop is finalized, we have a very clear blueprint of all the tasks that need to be done, which we, by the way, map over to a cloud tool in Basecamp, where we really identify who does what on the project. And that's really a very good way of managing the project onwards. From there, it remains that the more focus there is from the customer side, certainly from our side also, the speedier the project will be deployed. And again, as John mentioned, really we're talking hours, and calendar time is probably some few weeks there. So that's how we handle projects there.
Thank you very much, Keith. Then I got the next one here. What's the effort needed on the NAV side and on the Salesforce side in regards to accommodating our standard setup? So let me just share my screen here, because there we got a wonderful wiki system with all our documentation, also on the functionality, on transfers and everything in there. Have direct links to wiki, but here we also have a description of the standard integration setup. And let me just go to the Salesforce Dynamics NAV description, where we have, first of all, we have links to install on the Salesforce side, if we take that first. Ready to go installation packages to install the objects to contain the sales history information, the ledger entries, open sales orders from Navision. So that's just a link and install, so you don't need to do any field by field setup on that part. And then to accommodate the logic within the Rapidi standard setup, we have a detailed list on which tables, depending, of course, of, you know, if you want the full functionality, only parts of it, but we have the full description on which tables you need to create new fields on, and which types, and so on. And an important thing here is you don't need to add any like business logic or code on the triggers in NAV, like on add or on modify and all that. It's just empty text fields in NAV to accommodate the logic. To tie Salesforce and Navision properly together. And we normally base that on the Salesforce unique ID to save API calls on the Salesforce side, which is something we have been, optimizing during our last 8-9 years, integrating with Salesforce to do it as good as possible in regards to the limitations that you have in subscriptions on API calls available and stuff like that. So we have a detailed list on what to do, so it's pretty much out of the box and ready to go. Okay, so I hope that answers that one. Then I have another one here in regards to the standard integration also on the opportunities to NAV sales orders. If we can do anything else than opportunities, can we use Salesforce quotes? And yes, we can. As it has been mentioned, we read the design of Salesforce, which means we read every object, standard and custom, that's available to us, and we can modify the standard opportunity to NAV sales order transfer to read from Salesforce quotes, or it can also read from the newer Salesforce sales order objects. So that doesn't really matter to us. It's just a question of adaptation and how you work with Salesforce in that regard. Then we have another one here on versions of Salesforce, which versions we support. They have like versions we support all, because you know they release new versions all the time. I assume the question might go on editions. We are Salesforce AppExchange certified, so we went through the whole certify check and scrutiny in regards to security, you know, how we handle data, how we communicate, how we store passwords, all that stuff. So we are Salesforce AppExchange certified, which means we can integrate with the professional version and upwards without you having to buy additional API access. So we can do the professional version of Salesforce, actually it's the professional edition. Now I'm mixing it up, of Salesforce and upwards, without you having to buy the API access explicit on top of that. Okay, and then the last one here, I think it might have been covered, but let me just go into it again. How we store data when we replicate. The quick answer is we don't store any data whatsoever. As been mentioned, we are end-to-end, so we read data from the source and write it into the destination without any intermediate file storage or anything like that. It's in packages that's been handled in the memory and communicated directly to the destination. And if I can take it really quick, if we have NAV from Salesforce, then what happens is we have the Rapidi connector locally connecting and doing the communication locally with NAV. It reads data in this event, and it then strips metadata off, compresses in packages, sends it off to the central Rapidi integration engine, which then decompress and communicates it directly to Salesforce without storing anything whatsoever. So at no point any data is stored in our system. The only situation where you will see data of yours if we have an error situation and you get an error message from like Salesforce or NAV. In those cases, which would actually also be probably a good point, we log the native error messages. So if we try to communicate to Salesforce and Salesforce provides an error, then what you will see in the Rapidi interface is actually the error provided by Salesforce. And also with NAV, if there is an error on integrating with NAV, it's the NAV error message that is displayed in Rapidi. So we don't have our own like logic there in regards to errors. It's actually the errors that you get from the different systems with the data that causes the error. So it's easy to debug and solve. Yeah, that wraps up the Q&A for me. If nobody has anything else,
Perfect.
Let me just check if anything came in
No,
while I was talking.
Is that do it? Any other questions, Thomas?
No, I think we're good.
Okay,
I think there
that's
was one.
perfect. Oh, is there one?
Is there one?
Did we miss one?
Oh, sorry. Oh, yeah, sorry.
You want to go ahead and take that, Thomas?
Yeah,
Before
let
we
me do
wrap up?
that. If the same field requirements for the tables require for your Dynamics CRM as well, nope. If we take a Dynamics CRM, we also have a standard integration for that, but it's different. So it's not the same fields that are required. That's a different kind of installation. The logic is somewhat the same, but not what we have displayed today. But you can say it's the same kind of principle, but in Dynamics CRM, you do have standard objects for containing invoices and stuff like that. So we don't have the like install packages for Microsoft CRM, and there will be some fields required, but again it's going to be dead fields that are just containing logic information without any code behind it. So it's a little bit different, but the principle of how we do the integration is the same. I hope that answers that.
Sure, that's perfect, Thomas. And thank you very much. Those are very good questions, and thanks to the audience for putting those forward. It's always good to go through those live and while we're all together. And it looks like as that last question came in a little bit late, if there are further questions, I just want to make sure that everybody online had our contact details. We'd certainly welcome the opportunity to go through that last question and any others in more detail as it relates to your business. With that, I just want to say thank you to all the attendees. Appreciate you taking the time and an hour out of your day to join us this morning. We hope that you found that the session was useful, and we look forward to hearing from you again. And finally, Beate, as I mentioned, will send out the recordings for this session, so you'll have that, and certainly contact us with any follow-up questions. Thank you very much, and we appreciate your attendance. Bye for now.